Ladies, braids, and gentlemen, welcome to part 2 of the 3-part series on the giant chief King Tuscaloosa of Alabama. Let's get it.
After they saw they could not quite overcome the might of the indigenous Indian with force, then came the Bible, the King Tames, the Bible which was made to tame the kings of the New World.
Look at the image though. Foreigners coming by sailboats. Look at how they portrayed the Indians already on their land. You think we were welcoming them with open arms? Look what he got in his hand. He got the Bible in his hand, don't he? The cross right here. That's one of their logos, by the way. But yeah, a lot of people were involved in that. King William, Society for Propagating the Gospel in Foreign Parts. You had Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. Thomas Bray, the United Society for Propagating the Gospel. That was another one. All of this stuff came from the Church of England. But Dane, are you telling us that it came from a church? Yeah, but Dane, who was in charge of the church? Wait a minute, I'm getting there. Give him this one. National Portrait Gallery of London owned this picture, huh? Right? So I'm about to show y'all something. The reason why I keep showing you King James I is because he founded all of them, technically, because all of them fell up under the London Company, aka the Virginia Company, aka the Virginia Company of London. The Virginia Company of London was a joint stock company chartered by King James I in 1606 to establish a colony in North America. Stop. Did they send an army to come over here? Did they send an army to come over here? No, they did not. They sent missionaries. They knew they couldn't win the war. Again, they couldn't get you with the all this crap right here. Like they knights, they ain't bring no people like this over here. It wasn't no they were in armored suits and had swords. And it wasn't none of this, y'all. It was no guns, no swords. They came with the Bible. But what did we just say? The Virginia Company of London was a joint stock company chartered by King James I in 1606 to establish a colony of North America. The King James Version was done in 1611. I want y'all to see where I'm getting at here. I'm taking it slow for a reason because I want this to sink in what I'm about to show you next. Let me tell you first. King James couldn't have been his name because the letter J was not in the alphabet at that time. The King James Version of the Bible came out in 1611. For the colony of Britannia, laws divine and moral and martial. Wait a minute. Isn't that what the Bible's supposed to be doing? In 1612, the year after the King James Version. This exposing something. So if it's for the colony of Virginia, if it's for them, then who? The people that are there or the people going there? We're gonna get there. Hold up. We walking it down. Tames. It's King Tames. Wait a minute, y'all. Hold up. About to show y'all something. Here's another reason why we know. Don't London got a Thames River? Don't they got a Thames River? Not Thomas. Thames River. Yeah. They wouldn't just be naming it Thames for no reason. Huh? Looky. Thames. So what does that have to do with King James? Well, if it's King Tames, then it's the King Tames Version. It's the version to tame the kings. I'm walking it down. Submitting. Submission. Make the king submit. Oh, it get deeper. The word king, right? The etymology of the word king. The descendant of a divine race. Listen. Descendant of a divine race. Leader of the people. Family race. The word kin is in king. Noble birth. one who descends from noble birth, the descendant of a divine race. This is referring to families. This is referring to us. They gonna hang you to King Tames, to tame the kings. Because think about it, whatever you want to be subject to, you have to tame it. Whatever they want you to be subject to, you have to tame it. There's your curse, ladies and gentlemen. It wasn't just Deuteronomy. It was the whole thing. The letter J was not there at that time of 1612. It was not there at that time of 1612. Y'all know how deep that is? You gonna learn today. King Tames. Again, to go back, he sent missionaries, right? With Bibles in their hand to tame the kings. They didn't come with no sword. Oh, this picture right here, they ain't come with no sword, no guns. They came with Bibles to tame you.
It was a luxuriant country, fertilized by many rivers, inhabited by a more docile race than any yet seen. So they ran into other Indian tribes that were not as aggressive, that were not as prepared for war as the previous Indians that they had ran into. And it's no surprise to me, sad to say, because here in the South, we have the most indoctrinated, brainwashed, stuck on this man's education and religion. They can't get past it. They will not read this history. They won't listen to this history to see that it's repeating itself. We have the same behavioral patterns that the indigenous people, our indigenous ancestors displayed when DeSoto arrived. The most docile Indian than any he had contact with. And it says, DeSoto was astonished to find 4,000 warriors were furnished as an escort and guide, and 4,000 retainers to carry their baggage. The mystery was explained just before starting when DeSoto found that this large force was intended to accompany him for the purpose of war against the prophets of Copachico. And the Copachico is an Indian chief king. The Spanish were invading, yet we have one tribe sending troops for war against another tribe. So he's aiding his actual enemy, thinking his enemy is his friend. And his actual ally, he's preparing for war against by sending these warriors along with DeSoto. So we can see some questionable behavior between the indigenous tribes. The same scenarios we have today. Once again, history repeating itself. And parting with the Indians who had been their escort thus far, arrived at Copachico. DeSoto met an Indian princess here. She crossed the river in a grand canoe containing 6 ambassadors, herself under a canopy supported by a lance, reclining on cushions in the stern on landing and being seated in state. Her land had recently been ravaged by pestilence, but that she would share with strangers the maize which had been collected for the village, and would put them on their way of getting similar supplies from other villages. So we were conforming, letting these savages, the Spanish, come through, take our people, kill them, and we were supplying them. We wanted peace because we are a peaceful people. Sometimes I wish that we were more warlike in these scenarios. The wars we're fighting here in America on these streets, we're embarrassing our ancestors because they died fighting so you could have your own land. And at this present point, the land is occupied by the corporation of America. And all along the way, they're running into settlements of houses and temples, very developed land, civilized people, not savages, people defending their territory. In his march from Cofachiqui, De Soto passed through the province of Achalaque, without doubt the land of our modern Cherokees, and said by him to be the most wretched country in all Florida. The inhabitants were feeble, peaceful race, and nearly naked. What does he mean when he says, without doubt, the land of our modern Cherokees? Is he saying this because those tribes' identities have been invaded by more so white-looking Indians, the Mongolian and Siberian stock, not the Negroid phenotype and stock? That's why he's saying our modern Indians. What are our modern Indians? Shouldn't they all be the same, both modern and the past and ancient? Are they all the same people? In this statement, he is pointing out that there is a modern Indian and that there was the indigenous original Indian, the real native Indian, the real American Indian, not this modern stock that he's speaking of, modern Cherokees. And he says here, of all of them, the inhabitants were feeble and peaceful and nearly naked. That's not what he encountered before. They were well dressed, living in houses. They had ambassadors, governments. Now he runs into his modern Cherokee brothers, and they are nothing like that. So what does that tell you? The territories of the Indian princess, or rather her tributary Caciques, ended. For 5 days they traversed a chain of easy mountains, and they went through Georgia, Rome, Georgia, to the village of Chiaja, reported as an island in the Coosa, about 15 miles long. Here they found great store of butter, bear's fat melted into gourds, and walnut oil, honey, all good to the taste. And here De Soto was encamped for several days to rest his horses, which time he made constant inquiries for the precious metals of which he had heard much at Cofachiqui, in search of material items, greed, causing him to kill, maim, and destroy. All along the way, they're discovering these large pearls, all these valuable objects here in this so-called new land, which is actually the old country. They're discovering wealth, and it's fueling them to continue to march on. A Portuguese narrator says that 14 bushels of pearls were taken from the sepulchre of Cofachiqui alone, indicate that at that day there were great quantities in our rivers that are not found in these later days. And while the pearls no longer in the river, because they took too much, they were greedy. Greed is always comes back to greed. They destroyed the environment, not even caring about it, all in the name of greed, to take these pearls back so they can have fortunes, they can show the king he can have fortunes, and they can come back and get more and more. Then more truth, more religion, then more pilgrims, then more Bibles. DeSoto was informed that there were metals of yellow color to be found about 30 miles to the north, but that the country was so broken and mountainous that the horsemen could not travel through it. Parties were sent out on foot. Greed. We gotta find the gold. They went through DeKalb County, Alabama, along the line of the Alabama and Chattanooga Railroad, 158 miles from Tuscaloosa by rail. Almost to Chief Tuscaloosa, y'all. The Chief King, giant. July 2nd, 1540. Keep in mind it is 2024, which would make this almost 500 years ago. We're gonna see what DeSoto did time he got into Alabama, because he knew he was about to enter the land of the giant Chief King Tuscaloosa. He had heard rumors. And so DeSoto entered Alabama and arrived at the village of Acoste, built on the extreme point of an island. He was met by a cacique with 1,500 warriors, decorated with war plumes and equipped with arms. He succeeded in capturing the cacique and a number of his chief warriors, and holding them as prisoners, he forced them to accompany him on his journey. For 24 days, the army slowly pursued its course through a populous and fertile province called Acosta, which embraced the present counties of Benton, Talladega, Coucy, and Tallapoosa. The inhabitants were friendly and hospitable. On the approach of DeSoto to the principal town, called Oso Cosa, he was met by a cacique borne with a litter by 4 servants, and followed by a train of 1,000 warriors gorgeously arrayed, accompanied by several Indians singing and playing upon instruments. He was a young man of fine person and noble countenance. Upon his head wore a diadem of brilliant feathers, and from his shoulders flung a mantle of marten skins, decorated with large pearls. This village was situated upon the east banks of the Noble River and contained 500 spacious houses. It was well stored with provisions, such as maize, pumpkins, beans, plums, grapes. This, Mr. McCullough says, was Old Coosa, so called upon the maps, and in latitude 3330. At this point, the army passed nearly due east and within 50 or 60 miles of present city of Tuscaloosa. DeSoto remained there until the 20th of August and then departed, taking the cacique with him and a large number of his warriors to bear his baggage, and had to leave a Negro behind who was sick, the first darky, I suppose, who was ever settled in Alabama. He says they had to leave a Negro behind. Who is he referring to when he says they had to leave a Negro behind? And he was the first darky, I suppose, to ever settle Alabama. This is what Thomas, the presenter of this speech, says. Now, if we know that DeSoto is capturing natives all along the way, making them serve his army, and he's keeping these captives, wouldn't it make sense to assume that the darky that he left behind was an indigenous Indian? You just told on yourself, Thomas, because what other Negro did he have? Did he bring Negroes from Africa with him? Why is he referred to as a Negro and not an Indian? That is the question. Being that there's no evidence you had Negroes with you, or darkies, the only darkies you had with you were captive, kidnapped Indians, the darky has to be an Indian. I guess darky was an acceptable term back in Thomas's day, but we don't refer to each other as darky anymore. But to tell you the truth, I would prefer darky over being called black any day.
Can you name any other group that are being labeled primarily as the name of two continents? And why do you continuously call yourselves black people when your skin complexion is realistically different shades of the color brown? We were lawfully called Indian, mulatto, Negro, and then colored, right? Then some mysterious things happened in history where our very own people began to claim that they were black and proud. The etymology of the word black means colorless or the absence of color, which is true because if you would cut all the lights out, you would only see darkness. So if we were just being lawfully labeled as colored previously and now gravitating towards calling ourselves black, then we are inadvertently placing ourselves in a state of not being present, non-existent when it comes to our actual identities. And even more importantly, when it comes to law.
We arrived in a town called Tallahassee on the 18th of September. Without doubt, this was Tallahassee in Tallapoosa County, where a tribe of Creeks had the same name. At Tallahassee, which was the southern boundary of Coosa, DeSoto was met by an ambassador from the Cacique of the neighboring province called Tuscaloosa. This is a pure Choctaw compound word, according to Meek, from Tuscaloosa warrior, and Lusa, black. Well, did you hear that? This is a pure Choctaw compound word from Tuska, meaning warrior, and Lusa, meaning black, which would of course be warrior black. But by inversion into English, black warrior. And here we have the first mention in any history of the name Tuscaloosa. It is a Choctaw word meaning Tuscaloosa. Here is the first time that that word was mentioned, even though the word comes from native speech. I don't understand, Thomas. How can the word be just now mentioned when DeSoto arrives, but you're saying it in native tongue, in the indigenous tongue, Tuscaloosa? That is not Spanish. Lusa, black in Spanish is what? Negro. So, this couldn't be the first mention of the word Tuscaloosa. It's even spelled differently than it is now, as he even prints it here. I mean, he's telling on himself all through this manuscript, applying his own biases, telling lies even, to change the history to fit the narrative for his readers and his listeners. And so he says, here we have the first mention in any history of the name Tuscaloosa, as it is. You're not slick, Thomas, okay? We already know that. But you're trying to mislead the audience into believing that this was the first mention of the word. The first name in any note or prominence that can appear in any history of the United States. Yeah, I bet. Because this was way before the United States, buddy. This is in the 1500s. Continuing on. This was the name of the chieftain, the giant, chief, king, Tuscaloosa, as well as of his kingdom. He was represented as the most powerful of all the caciques of the country. His fame reached DeSoto long before he approached his dominions, which included immense regions around the south of Coosa. The ambassador was the son of the cacique and came attended by a large train of warriors. He was a noble and imposing appearance, taller than any Spaniard or Indian in the army. Now keep in mind, A cacique is the Indian chief king, in this case Tuscaloosa. And he's saying that his ambassador was his son, who was taller than any of the Spanish that he brought with him. If you know any military, they go for large, muscular warriors. We want the best warriors. De Soto, I'm sure, brought the best warriors, the best men of war, the best soldiers, the most fit, the biggest, the tallest, the strongest, the fastest. And none of them compare to Chief King Tuscaloosa's son. He towered above all of them. So what's that tell you? And they go on to say, as symmetrical and graceful as Apollo, and of proud and princely demeanor. His mission was one of peace, as usual with most of our indigenous ancestors. And he invited De Soto in the same manner of his father to visit his residence, an invitation which De Soto cheerfully accepted. Accordingly, he crossed the river on raft, and on the second night his army encamped in the woods, about 2 leagues from the village in which the cacique Tuscaloosa was quartered, which, however, was not the capital of his province. At an early hour next morning, accompanied by several of his cavaliers, De Soto set out to meet this powerful chieftain, whose territory embraced not only the country through which the river that bears his name meanders to the Gulf by the doors, but a great part of what are now the great states of Alabama and Mississippi. You hear that they speak of the river that bears his name, the Black Warrior River. Everything black, black, black. It should be indigenous, indigenous, indigenous. But we'll continue on. De Soto found that cacique Tuscaloosa prepared to receive him in state. He was posted on the crest of a hill, which commanded a wide view over a rich and beautiful valley. He was seated on a kind of stool made of wood, somewhat concave, but without back or arms. Such was the simple throne used by the caciques of the country. Around him stood 100 of his principal men, dressed in rich mantles and plumes. Besides him was his standard bearer, who bore on the end of a lance a dressed deerskin, stretched out to the size of a buckler. It was of a yellow color, traversed by 3 blue stripes. Does that sound familiar? This was the great banner of this warrior chieftain. This was the only military standard that the Spaniards met with throughout the whole of their expedition. So this tells you Chief Tuscaloosa was a man of war. He was a warrior. He was a soldier, a very high-ranking soldier, a general in today's terms. 5-star, commanding all his forces. Tuscaloosa, like his son, was of noble appearance and gigantic proportions, being 1.5 feet taller than any of his warriors. Now, in this case, they didn't even compare Chief Tuscaloosa to the Spaniards. They compared him to his warriors. And keep in mind, one of his warriors was his son who greeted them, and he towered over the Spaniards. And Chief Tuscaloosa towered over him. So what does that say of these gigantic proportions that they speak of?
Ladies, braids, and gentlemen, make sure you tune in next week for the last and final part 3 of the Chief King Tuscaloosa series. Peace.